I was 12 years old when I first noticed what Father Aurelius was doing. He wasn't like the other priests in our little mountain village of Strovemont. He walked slower, talked softer, and always seemed to be looking over his shoulder, not for danger, but as if something unseen followed him. I used to carry the censer for him during funerals, trailing behind with smoke curling around us as bells tolled. But one winter morning, there was no bell. The snow was still thick on the ground when I saw him digging. It wasn't unusual for the priest to prepare graves in advance. Winter freezes the earth hard, and the groundkeeper was old. But this time, there was no name, no coffin, no mourners waiting. Just Father Aurelius, sweating under his wool cloak, swinging a spade into frozen dirt. I stood at the edge of the cemetery, watching my breath puff like little ghosts. He saw me, paused and gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Go on home, boy," he said. "Too cold for you out here." I didn't leave. I hid behind a crooked oak and waited until he finished. When the grave was done, he lowered a wooden cross into the earth, but there was no body to bless, no tears to shed. Only a mound of earth and a cross with no name carved into it. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Our village had 30 families, and every death was known to all. There hadn't been any bells, no prayers for the dead. So why dig a grave at all? The next morning, I asked my grandfather. He shook his head. "Best not to ask questions about priests, lad. They answer to God, not to us." But I couldn't help it. The sight of that empty grave gnawed at me like hunger. I decided to follow him again. It happened 3 weeks later. A blizzard had passed through, and the cemetery path was buried knee-deep. Yet there he was again, lantern swinging, spade in hand. I trailed far behind, trying to keep my boots quiet on the frozen ground. This time, I saw something more. After digging, Father Aurelius knelt beside the hole and whispered in Latin. I couldn't make out all the words, but I recognized fragments from Mass. Phrases about rest for the soul, deliverance from evil, the gates of paradise. But when he finished, he pressed his hand flat against the snow and just stayed there, as if feeling for something under the ground. And then he cried. I had never seen a priest cry. Not at funerals, not when comforting widows, not even when lightning split the bell tower the previous year. But here, alone in the cemetery, he wept like a child. I wanted to run to him, to ask what was wrong, but something told me to stay hidden. When he rose, he didn't look around. He placed the cross again, brushed off his cloak, and walked back to the rectory. I crept closer to read the cross. No name, no date, only one word carved deep. Forgive. From then on, I couldn't keep away. I followed him whenever I could, and every month or so there'd be another grave. Always the same. No coffin, no mourners, only Father Aurelius, his prayers, and his tears. I wasn't the only one who noticed something odd. The blacksmith, gruff man who never smiled, whispered to my father that he'd seen the priest sneaking out late at night. Some villagers said Father Aurelius had visions, that angels spoke to him. Others claimed he was losing his mind, but no one dared confront him directly. After all, he'd been our priest for 20 years. He'd baptized every child, buried every elder, and never once asked anything in return. One evening after supper, I overheard my parents talking low by the fire. My father's voice was sharp. "He's digging again. I saw the fresh mound today." My mother shushed him. "Stop it. You'll have the boy scared." "I'm not scared," I blurted from my stool. "Why is Father Aurelius burying empty graves?" They went silent. My father gave me a long look. "You stay out of grown folks' business here. This village doesn't need curious boys poking around in holy matters." But I couldn't stop. The next time I followed the priest, I got close enough to hear his entire prayer. The wind was low, and the night was quiet. O Lord, grant rest to this soul, nameless among men but known to you. Let not the sins of strangers be counted against this flock. Let the earth receive what heaven has already judged. Strangers, sins, nameless among men. What did it mean? When he was done, I stepped out from behind the gravestone. My boots crunched in the snow. "Father?" I called, my voice shaking. He turned, startled, lantern light flickering across his face. For a moment he looked angry, but then he sighed. "You shouldn't be here, boy." "Who are you burying?" I asked. "There's no one in the ground." He closed his eyes. "Go home." "Tell me, or I'll tell my father," I said, though I wasn't sure I would. Father Aurelius came closer, his shadow tall and thin on the snow. He crouched so his face was level with mine. "Some graves," he whispered, "aren't for bodies. They're for sins that must be buried where no one else can find them." I didn't understand. "But why here? Why alone?" "Because some things," he said, "should not be remembered by the living." Before I could ask more, he took me by the shoulder and marched me back toward the village. His grip was firm but not unkind. "Never follow me again," he said. "Promise me." I didn't promise. I just nodded, my breath clouding in the cold air. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, wondering what kind of sins could be buried in a graveyard. By spring there were 5 empty graves, and I knew I wouldn't be able to stay away forever. Something dark was hiding in our peaceful village, and Father Aurelius was burying it, one nameless mound at a time. I couldn't stay away from the cemetery. Even when Father Aurelius caught me, even when he warned me in that quiet voice of his, the kind that made you feel you disappointed not just him, but heaven itself, I couldn't help it. It was like the earth itself was whispering, like those graves were calling me back. Spring thawed the snow, leaving the ground soft and smelling of mud and moss. The cemetery looked different without its white blanket. The crooked crosses leaned more heavily, the names carved into them already being eaten by wind and rain. But the new graves, the empty ones, stood out. Fresh soil, no flowers, no visitors. Just 5 lonely mounds at the far edge where even the birds avoided perching on the fence. One afternoon after school, I slipped away from my chores and crept there again. The air felt wrong, too still, as if even the wind was holding its breath. I crouched by one of the mounds and brushed away some dirt. The wood of the cross was rough under my fingers, splintering, and again there was no name. Just that same word, forgive. I remember whispering it aloud. "Forgive who?" That's when I heard it. A rustle, faint but close. I froze. The cemetery was empty. No priest, no mourners, no one at all. I held my breath. It came again, a soft, scraping sound, not quite like leaves moving. More like nails on wood, muffled and distant. I jerked back so hard I fell into another grave mound, heart hammering. It stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving only silence and my own ragged breathing. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my grandfather. They'd only scold me for sneaking into the cemetery again. But that sound haunted me. For days afterward, I dreamed of hands clawing at dirt from underneath, of hollow eyes staring up through the earth. I'd wake up sweating. The image of Father Aurelius's sorrowful face burned into my mind. The priest avoided me after that. He didn't scold me in mass anymore, didn't ask me to carry the censer, didn't even pat my head when I passed by. It was like he knew I'd been too close to something I wasn't supposed to see. Then, in May, something happened. A peddler came through Strovemont, an old man with a cart full of ribbons and trinkets, the kind who'd trade needles for eggs and stories for bread. He was cheerful at first, but when he saw the cemetery on the hill, his face went pale. I watched him whisper something to Father Aurelius outside the chapel. The priest listened, then gripped the man's arm so hard the ribbons spilled from his cart. They went inside together, and I crept up to the door to listen. "I swear it, Father," the peddler's voice quavered. "I saw her, same as I saw her 10 years ago." "Keep your voice down," Father Aurelius hissed. "I thought she was dead," the peddler went on. "You buried her yourself." "She is dead," the priest said sharply. "Then why?" the peddler whispered. "Was she walking past my cart at dusk?" There was silence. I pressed my ear harder against the wood until it hurt. Then I heard Father Aurelius's voice, low and trembling, not with fear but with anger. "You say nothing of this to anyone, do you understand? Not a soul." The peddler muttered something I couldn't catch, then the door creaked. I barely scrambled away in time. That night I couldn't sleep again. Who was she? And what did it mean that Father Aurelius himself had buried her? The next morning, I asked my grandfather, "Has anyone ever come back?" I said carefully. He stared at me for a long time. His eyes were cloudy with age, but they still had that hard glint, like flint under frost. "Boy," he said, "there are questions you never ask in this village, not if you want to stay safe." "Why?" "Because," he said, leaning close, "some of the dead here don't rest easy, and some men help them stay that way." He wouldn't say more. By summer, Father Aurelius had dug 3 more graves. I counted them every week like a miser counts coins. Always at dawn or dusk, always alone. Once, I saw him with a bundle wrapped in linen, too small to be a body, too large to be nothing. He lowered it gently into the earth, made the sign of the cross, and covered it with dirt. I wanted to scream at him to stop, to tell me what he was doing, but fear pinned me in place. One evening, I found the courage to confront him. He was lighting candles in the chapel when I slipped inside. "Father," I said, "I know what you're doing." He didn't look up. "Do you?" "You're burying things," I said, "things that aren't people." He set the candle down and turned to me. His face was calm, but his eyes looked older than ever. "Some graves," he said softly, "are not for the dead, but for the living." "That doesn't make sense," I shouted. My voice echoed off the stone walls. "Why do they have crosses if there's no one in them? Why do you cry?" His hand trembled on the candlestick. For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he whispered, "Because the earth must hide what men cannot face, and because sins unburied are sins that grow." I didn't understand. Not fully. But I knew he wasn't lying. There was a heaviness in his words that even a boy could feel. Before I could ask more, a knock came at the chapel door. It was the peddler, pale and sweating. "She's back," he whispered hoarsely. "I saw her again, near the old mill." Father Aurelius's face went white. "Stay here," he told me. Then to the peddler, "Show me." I followed them at a distance, heart pounding. They walked fast, down the path past the river, toward the abandoned mill on the edge of the woods. The sky was darkening, crickets already singing. When they reached the clearing, the peddler pointed with a shaking hand. "There," he hissed. "By the water wheel." I squinted. At first I saw nothing, just weeds and shadow, but then something moved. A figure, thin and bent, in a faded dress that swayed in the evening breeze. Father Aurelius whispered something I couldn't hear. The figure turned its head, though it was too far for me to see a face. Then it vanished into the trees. The peddler cursed and crossed himself. Father Aurelius didn't move. He just stared after her, his jaw clenched. And that's when I realized the graves weren't empty after all. Not really. The priest was trying to bury something that refused to stay buried. After that night near the old mill, I couldn't think about anything else. Who was that woman? Why did the peddler insist she had died years ago? And why did Father Aurelius look so terrified, as though he'd seen judgment itself walking out? Of the woods? I tried to ask him the next day, but he avoided me. He passed me on the chapel steps without a word, face pale and lined. He seemed thinner, too, like he hadn't slept. Whenever anyone spoke to him in the village square, he smiled politely, but I could see his hands trembling as he blessed children or shook hands with the elders. By midsummer, 2 more nameless graves appeared. I didn't see him dig them this time, but the earth was fresh, and the crosses bore the same single word: forgive. The whispers started then, rumors spreading faster than weeds in a field. Some said wolves had been seen on the hills at night. Others swore they heard someone walking past their doors long after midnight, though no footprints were ever found. The baker's wife claimed she saw a pale figure standing at the edge of the orchard before dawn. The blacksmith muttered to my father that Father Aurelius was hiding something, that he'd always been hiding something. I wanted to tell someone what I'd seen at the mill, but who would believe a boy? My father would box my ears for sneaking out at night. My mother would cross herself and tell me not to speak of ghosts. And my grandfather, well, he already seemed to know more than he would say. One evening, while the sky was bleeding red with sunset, I gathered my courage and went to him. He was sitting on the porch sharpening his old hunting knife, his hands steady despite his age. "Grandfather," I said, "who was the woman the peddler saw?" His eyes narrowed. "What woman?" "The one by the mill," I pressed. "The one who's supposed to be dead." He stopped sharpening, the rasp of steel on stone falling silent. "You've been following the priest again." I swallowed hard, but didn't deny it. Grandfather sighed. "Her name was Anna Veska," he said finally. "Died 10 years ago, or so we thought." "What happened to her?" "She drowned," he said flatly. "Fell into the river one spring night. The current carried her to the mill pond. Father Aurelius himself held the service, but no one ever saw her body. Too much water, they said. Too many days gone by." "But if she died," I whispered, "how can she be walking?" Grandfather's gaze was heavy. "Some people," he said, "don't rest because they have no grave to hold them. And some priests," he hesitated, "some priests try to give them one. That chilled me worse than any ghost story." "So those empty graves are not empty," he finished. "Not in the way you think." I wanted to ask more, but he waved me away. "Enough of this talk. Go help your mother." But I couldn't let it go. That night I sneaked out again, past my parents' door, past the sleeping dogs, down the path to the cemetery. The moon was high, throwing cold silver light over the crosses. I crept to the newest mound and crouched low, pressing my ear to the ground. Foolish, I know. What did I expect to hear? But the memory of that faint scratching sound still haunted me. At first there was nothing but the chirp of crickets. Then, so faint I thought I imagined it, came a sigh. Long and low, as though the earth itself was breathing. I jerked back, heart pounding so hard I nearly fell over. "Curiosity will get you killed, boy." I spun around. Father Aurelius stood, in the shadow of the yew tree, lantern in hand, eyes dark and tired. I wasn't," I stammered. "Don't lie to a priest," he said quietly. "You've been following me for months, watching." "I just want to know the truth," I blurted. "Why are you burying empty graves? Who is Anna Veska?" His face tightened. For a long moment, I thought he'd scold me, maybe drag me home to my parents. But instead, he set down his lantern and sank onto a flat gravestone, as though the weight of his secrets had finally become too heavy to carry. "Anna Veska," he murmured, "was no ordinary girl. She had a darkness in her. Not her fault. Some people are born with burdens they never asked for. She used to wander at night talking to shadows. Her mother said she heard voices in the trees. She was crazy?" I asked. He shook his head sharply. No, she saw things the rest of us cannot. I tried to help her. I prayed for her, blessed her, begged her to stay away from the river at night. But one spring evening she disappeared, and by morning we found her scarf tangled in the mill wheel. But you said she had no body. His hands clenched together. The river took it. I gave her a grave anyway. I thought it was enough. Was it? His eyes burned in the lantern light. No grave is deep enough when sin clings to the soul. Shivered. What sin? She hurt people, he said simply. Things happened in this village no one talks about. Children woke crying, livestock went missing, strange marks carved on doors. Everyone whispered it was wolves, but wolves don't. Knock on windows. My mouth went dry. And now she's back? She never left, he whispered. The earth won't hold her because it never held her to begin with. That's why I dig. Each grave is a prayer, a place to bind the wandering dead. But it only works. For a time. I didn't understand everything, but I understood this much. Father Aurelius was terrified. Suddenly, a sound cut through the night, a low creak, like a door swinging on rusty hinges. It came from the far edge of the cemetery. The priest grabbed his lantern and motioned me to stay down, but of course I didn't listen. I followed close as he hurried to the fence. There, just beyond the boundary, stood a woman. Thin, pale, hair plastered to her cheeks as though wet. She wore a faded dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her eyes glimmered in the lantern light. Not white, not black, but something in between. Anna, Father Aurelius said hoarsely. She didn't speak. She only tilted her head, watching us with that strange, lifeless stillness. You have to rest, he said. You have to let go. Her lips parted in what might have been a smile. Then she turned and walked into the trees without a sound. I wanted to chase her, but the priest caught my arm. No, he whispered fiercely. If you follow her, you'll never come back. We stood there until the night swallowed her completely. Then Father Aurelius let go of my arm and looked at me with weary eyes. Do you understand now? He asked. I shook my head. No. Good, he said. Pray you never do. But even as he led me home, I knew I'd follow him again. And next time I'd follow Anna Veska too, no matter where she led. After the night we saw Anna Veska by the cemetery, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her pale figure swaying among the trees, that faint smile like she knew something the living weren't meant to know. Father Aurelius tried to keep me away. He no longer trusted my nods and promises. He started locking the chapel at dusk and walking home by different paths, glancing over his shoulder as though I were a thief chasing him. But I still followed, hidden among hedgerows and ruined walls. The village had begun to notice strange things, though no one spoke too loudly. Chickens vanished from coops without a sound. Dogs refused to go near the churchyard at night, whining. With tails tucked, the cobbler swore his door, bolted tight, was found open every morning. My mother told me to stop running out after dark, though she never explained why. People's faces looked tight and pinched, like they were holding their breath. One evening, I overheard my parents talking in urgent whispers. It's happening again, my father muttered. It's just foolishness, my mother said sharply. Old stories, people scaring themselves. You didn't see the marks on Veska's barn door, father shot back. Same as before. My stomach knotted. Same as before. Before what? I decided I had to see for myself. So when midnight came and the house lay still, I crept out again. The moon hung low and swollen, bathing everything in pale blue light. I headed for the cemetery first, heart thudding, and crouched behind the stone wall. That's when I saw them. Not just Father Aurelius, but others too. A line of figures, silent as ghosts, walking single file up the path. Men and women from our own village, the miller, the blacksmith, even old Marta, who never left her hearth after sunset. Each carried a lantern shaded so the light barely leaked out. At the front walked Father Aurelius, holding a wooden cross high. They filed into the graveyard, their faces grim, their eyes downcast. I crawled along the wall to see better. At the far end, where the nameless mounds lay, they formed a circle. Father Aurelius set the cross into the ground and began chanting in Latin, his voice low but firm. The others joined, murmuring prayers. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the circle lay another grave. But this one was open, a shallow pit, barely 3 feet deep, and beside it, a bundle wrapped in linen, the size of a child. I clapped a hand over my mouth to stop myself from crying out. The villagers stood motionless as the priest lowered the bundle into the pit. No one wept. No one crossed themselves. They just watched as he shoveled dirt over it, their faces pale and blank in the moonlight. When the mound was finished, Father Aurelius planted another cross. I could just make out the carved word, "Forgive." Then, as silently as they'd come, the villagers turned and left in single file, their shaded lanterns bobbing down the path. I waited until they were gone, then crept to the new grave. The earth was still warm from their hands. I dug with my fingers until I found the edge of the linen bundle. I was shaking so hard I nearly tore it open. But before I could, a voice rang out behind me. "Stop!" I spun around. Father Aurelius was standing there alone now, lantern blazing. His face was white with anger. Or fear. I couldn't tell which. "What are you doing here, boy?" he demanded. "What's in the ground?" I shot back. "Why are you burying things at night? Why are the villagers helping you?" He strode forward and seized my wrist, hard enough to make me wince. "You don't know what you're meddling with," he hissed. "This isn't for children to see." "I'm not a child," I shouted, though my voice cracked. "If you're burying people, I want to know who they are. If you're burying things, I want to know what they are." For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then his grip loosened, his shoulders sagged, and he looked suddenly older than ever. "They're not people," he said quietly. "Not anymore." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes the dead don't stay where you put them," he whispered. "Sometimes they wander, and when they do, you have to give them somewhere to return to, somewhere to lie still. That's what these graves are for." But what was in that bundle? "Remnants," he said simply. "Things that belong to them. Hair, clothing, old, keepsakes. Anything that ties them to this earth. If you bury enough of those things, sometimes the soul follows." I stared at him, horrified. Was that Anna Veska's grave? No. His eyes darkened. "That one is for someone else. Someone who's already walking." A chill ran through me. "Who?" "Go home," he said sharply. "Forget what you saw." But I couldn't. The very next night, I followed him again. This time, he didn't go to the cemetery. He went down the winding path to the river, lantern swinging low. I crept after him, careful to stay in the shadows. He stopped near the mill pond, knelt by the water, and placed something on the ground. A ribbon, faded red. "Anna," he whispered, "you don't have to wander. You can rest. Just follow where I lead." A ripple crossed the water, though no wind stirred it. I held my breath. Then I saw her again, standing on the far bank. Her pale hair hung wet over her shoulders, her dress clinging like it hadn't dried in years. Father Aurelius held up the cross. "Rest," he begged. "Let go." She didn't move. Then slowly she raised one hand and pointed, not at him, but at me. I stumbled back, my boot snapping a twig. The priest whirled around, his face blazing with fury and fear. "Run!" he shouted. I didn't argue. I bolted through the reeds, heart hammering, branches clawing at my clothes. Behind me I heard splashing in the shallows, though weather it Was Father Aurelius chasing me or Anna Vesca crossing the river? I couldn't tell. When I finally burst onto the village road, gasping for air, the night was silent again. No priest, no woman. Only the faint sound of water lapping at the banks far behind me. I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her pointing. Not at Father Aurelius. Not at anyone else. At me. The next morning, Father Aurelius came to our house. His cloak was wet to the knees, his eyes bloodshot. He asked to speak to my parents. I sat in the corner while he told them I'd been wandering at night, disobeying their orders. My father's face grew hard, my mother's eyes frightened. They promised to keep me inside after dark, even to bar the door if necessary. But before he left, Father Aurelius knelt beside me. His voice was low enough my parents couldn't hear. "She's taken an interest in you," he whispered. "You need to stay away from the graves, from the mill, from anywhere she's been." "Why me?" I whispered back. His gaze was heavy with sorrow. "Because the dead don't choose at random, and because you're brave enough or foolish enough to follow." That night, I heard the village bell toll once, just once. No one had died, at least not that I knew of. But when dawn came, another grave stood waiting at the edge of the cemetery. And this time, I knew it wasn't Father Aurelius who dug it. When I woke the next morning, the whole village buzzed like a hornet's nest. People spoke in tight, low voices, glancing at the chapel hill. Someone had dug a grave in the night. Not Father Aurelius, not the groundkeeper. Someone else. I ran to the cemetery before breakfast, ignoring my mother's shouting from the door. Dew clung to the grass, soaking my boots. Sure enough, at the far edge stood a fresh mound. The soil was dark and wet, like it had been turned only hours before. The wooden cross looked rough, hastily carved. No name, no date. Only the single word again: forgive. Father Aurelius was already there, cloak whipping in the wind, lantern still burning though the sun was up. He looked drawn, almost hollow. "Who did this?" I asked. He didn't answer. He walked around the grave slowly, crouched to touch the soil, sniffed the air as if the earth itself could tell him who had been there. Finally, he stood, eyes scanning the tree line. "It wasn't me," he said, "and that frightens me more than if it had been. Could it be Anna Vesca?" I whispered. The priest's head snapped toward me. "Don't speak her name here," he said sharply. "Not in consecrated ground." "But if she dug it—" "Graves don't dig themselves," he interrupted, though he didn't sound convinced. "And the dead shouldn't hold hammers and nails." The villagers arrived soon after. First Marta with her cane, muttering prayers under her breath. Then the blacksmith, red-faced and glaring as if he wanted to pound the ground flat. Then others, one by one, all staring at the nameless mound. "Who's in there?" someone asked. "No one," Father Aurelius said firmly. "Then why a grave?" "To mark a place," he replied, but he didn't explain further. The whispers began again. I caught snatches: wolves, witches, old curses. Someone swore they saw a lantern moving in the fields at midnight, though no man was abroad. Someone else said their hens laid blood-specked eggs. The whole village seemed to be holding its breath. That night, my parents barred the door just as the priest had told them to. My father even wedged a chair under the latch. But I'm a boy, and boys are good at windows. I slipped out through the loft hatch and dropped to the ground, heart hammering. I crept to the cemetery again. Clouds covered the moon, making everything ink black. I stumbled over gravestones, half afraid I'd trip into one of the empty pits Father Aurelius had dug. At the far edge, I stopped dead. Someone was standing by the new grave. A woman, her shape barely visible in the dark. I couldn't see her face, but I knew her anyway. "Anna," I whispered. She tilted her head like a dog hearing its name. Then she stepped back from the mound and gestured, not to the grave, but to me. I swallowed hard and took a step closer. "What do you want?" I whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked slowly toward the woods, glancing over her shoulder as if to see if I followed. I hesitated only a second before going after her. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I knew I was being a fool. I knew Father Aurelius would be furious. But some part of me had to know where she was leading me. The path wound through tangled brush down to the old mill pond. The wheel creaked in the night breeze. Anna stood on the bank, pale dress plastered to her skin as though still wet from the river where she'd drowned. She raised her arm again and pointed to the water. I shook my head. "I can't," I whispered. Her lips curved, not quite a smile, more like a sad invitation. Then she stepped backward into the pond, vanishing without a ripple. I was still frozen when Father Aurelius appeared, lantern bobbing, face white with terror. "Boy!" he shouted. "Get away from there!" "She was here," I stammered. "She wanted me to—" "Don't follow her!" he barked. "If you step into that water, you'll never step out again." He dragged me back up the path the arm scolding under his breath. "You have no idea what she is. You think she's some lost soul looking for comfort? No, she's looking for company." "But why me?" I gasped. "Why not you? Why not anyone else?" "She chooses the ones who see her," he said grimly, "and you've seen too much." When we reached the chapel, he lit every candle inside and made me sit in the front pew while he prayed over me. His voice trembled as he spoke, Latin words spilling like water over stone. "You can't keep doing this," I told him. "You can't just dig graves and hope she'll go away." His shoulders stiffened. "That's not all I'm doing." "What do you mean?" He turned to face me, eyes blazing with something fierce and desperate. "I'm not just burying things, I'm binding them. Every grave holds something of hers. A scrap of ribbon, a piece of cloth, even a lock of hair. When the last piece is buried, she'll have nowhere left to wander." "But what if she digs them back up?" I whispered. He hesitated. "Then God help us all." The next few days passed, intense silence. The villagers went about their work, but no one lingered outside after dark. Windows were shuttered early, doors barred. Children were kept close, even in daylight. My parents hardly let me out of sight. Then, one afternoon, the peddler returned. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he came into the square. "She's not alone," he whispered hoarsely to Father Aurelius. "I saw others in the fields, walking, following her." That night the bell tolled once again, just once, low and hollow, like a warning. And when dawn broke, there were 2 more graves at the far edge of the cemetery. No footprints led to them. No tools lay nearby. But the earth was freshly turned, and the crosses bore the same single word: forgive. Father Aurelius didn't look surprised. He only muttered, "She's gathering them now, the ones who never had graves of their own." "Who are they?" I asked. He glanced at me sharply. "Pray you never find out." But I would. And sooner than I wanted. Because the next night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Slow, steady, dragging feet. I peered out into the moonlight and saw 3 figures standing in the road. One tall, one stooped, and one thin and pale in her wet dress. Anna Veska was no longer alone. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, though it was there, pressing against my chest, but because I could still hear the sound of the shovel cutting through earth. Even after I'd left the cemetery, even after I'd run home and barred my door, the scrape of metal in soil clung to me like a curse. I kept replaying Father Aurelio's face in the moonlight, calm, solemn, almost sorrowful, as he buried yet another coffin with no body inside. morning came with a haze. The village was quieter than usual, and the old men at the well whispered instead of shouted. I noticed something strange. No one had gathered to mourn or talk about the death announced the previous evening. Normally, whenever someone passed, even the distant shepherds would make their way to pay respects. But this time, there was nothing, just silence. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the church. Father Aurelio was there, polishing candlesticks, humming under his breath. The hymn he sang was familiar but unsettling. It was the same one he had murmured over the empty graves. "Father," I said, voice trembling despite myself, "whose funeral was that last night?" He looked up with that gentle smile of his. "Ah, you heard the bell? Just an old traveler passing through. No family. I gave him a resting place, as is our duty." But I hesitated, feeling sweat gather on my palms. "There was no body. I saw you." His hand froze mid-polish. For a heartbeat, the church felt colder. Then he placed the candlestick down carefully and sighed. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing, my boy. Go home. Help your mother. Leave the matters of the dead to those called to tend them." That should have been the end of it. But of course I couldn't let it go. Something was deeply wrong, and I felt caught in its current. That night, I decided to follow him again. If he rang that bell, I'd be ready. Sure enough, as the moon rose, the bell tolled once more, slow, deliberate, echoing off the hills. I slipped from my bed and crept through the alleys, avoiding the watchful eyes of dogs and drunkards. I reached the cemetery wall just in time to see him lowering another coffin. He wasn't alone this time. 2 hooded men stood beside him, their faces hidden in shadow. They spoke in low tones, words I couldn't make out. When they finished, the priest made the sign of the cross and the men melted back into the darkness, leaving no sound of footsteps behind. I nearly stumbled as I backed away. My mind burned with questions. Who were those men? Why did they need empty graves? And why was Father Aurelio, of all people, helping them? The next morning, I confronted him again, this time more boldly. "Father, you're lying. You're burying nothing. Why?" He looked at me long and hard, then motioned for me to sit in one of the pews. Sunlight poured through the stained glass, painting the floor with colors, but I felt no warmth. "There are things in this village you're too young to carry," he said quietly. "But since you've seen too much, you deserve at least a part of the truth. I do not bury nothing. I bury sins." The words didn't make sense to me at first. "Sins? Not mine," he continued, eyes distant, "but of men who come at night with gold and secrets. They fear judgment more than death. They ask for graves to hide what they've done. I oblige them. The earth takes their burden, or so they believe." "But that's wrong," I blurted out. "The graves are supposed to be for people, not for hiding lies." "Would you rather they walk among us unburdened?" he asked sharply. Then his tone softened again. "Sometimes it is better for evil to be buried, even if no body lies beneath." I left the church feeling dizzy. His words sounded wise, but something in my gut told me this was more than just superstition. He wasn't just hiding guilt. He was protecting someone. But who? And from what? That night, I didn't wait for the bell. I went early, hiding inside the cemetery itself, crouched between 2 crooked headstones. My heart pounded as I waited. Hours passed. Finally, the gate creaked open. Father Aurelio came in with a lantern, and behind him those same 2 hooded figures. This time they were carrying something heavy between them, wrapped in cloth. Froze. It wasn't shaped like a coffin. It was smaller, rounder, like a sack. They laid it on the ground as the priest dug. I strained to see, but the darkness was thick. Then one of the men shifted, and the lantern's glow hit his face. My breath caught. It was Don Marcello, the wealthiest landowner in our village. "Father," Aurelio whispered a prayer as they lowered the bundle into the hole. I couldn't stay hidden any longer. My foot slipped on loose gravel, making a sharp crack. All three men's heads snapped up. "Who's there?" Marcello barked. I bolted. My legs carried me faster than ever before, but I heard them give chase, the lantern bobbing behind me, angry voices calling out. I tore through the alleys, vaulted over a fence, and didn't stop until I collapsed outside my home, gasping for air. The next day, I tried to tell my mother what I'd seen, but she just shushed me, fear in her eyes. "Don't speak of such things," she warned. "There are ears everywhere." By afternoon, word spread that a farmer's son had gone missing. Some swore they saw him leave town with traders. Others claimed wolves had taken him in the hills. But I knew better. I knew what they buried last night. And yet, no one questioned Father Aurelio. No one questioned Don Marcello. In fact, when I dared to mention Marcello's name to one of the old men at the well, he gave me a sharp look and muttered, "Keep your tongue if you value your life, boy." I began to realize the truth. Everyone knew. Everyone in the village understood something dark was happening. But they chose silence. They let the priest bury these sins because it kept worse things from spilling into daylight. But I wasn't like them. I couldn't just stand by. That evening, I confronted Father Aurelio for the last time. I cornered him near the sacristy, voice trembling with both anger and fear. "I know about Marcello," I hissed. "I know what you buried." His eyes, tired and sad, met mine. "Then you know enough to be afraid." "What are you protecting him from?" I demanded. "What about that farmer's son? Why help men like him?" "Because sometimes," he whispered, "mercy wears the mask of compromise. If I don't help them, worse men will. Blood will flood these streets. I bury empty graves so no one else has to be buried for real." His words struck me like a blow. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the priest I'd trusted all. My life was doing good even in secret. But how much good could there be in helping monsters? Before I could speak, he leaned close, voice barely audible. "Stay out of this, child. Leave before you end up in the ground yourself." And then he walked away, his robe brushing against the cold stone floor, leaving me alone with more questions than ever. I didn't know it yet, but by the next night everything would spiral out of control.